in construction as far as financing goes. There's a lot of options and it can be super overwhelming. What I will say is that some options are better than others, but it really comes down to strategizing when and where to use the specific types of financing. So on the screen here, you see like 5 different options. I'm actually going to start with one that's not on this screen. It would probably be looped into like a working capital loan, but it's called a merchant cash advance. I want to highlight this because these are extremely dangerous to your business. They're essentially predatory loans where oftentimes they have APRs as high as 350%, usually around 150 to 200%, but on the total loan amount. So if you took a loan for $100,000, you actually owe 200,000. Not to mention there are a lot of hidden fees involved, and I've personally seen really large, stable contractors go out of business by using these. So I just really want to highlight to stay clear here. And Derek, maybe you can speak to like credit cards. I know a lot of people probably have like the unlimited Amex line. So maybe you can speak a little bit more on that.
Yep. So there is the unlimited Amex line. A lot of the times it comes with a 3% charge on every purchase. So a lot of individuals will use this, not knowing that either the cost is hidden in some way when it comes to materials, because a lot of suppliers they'll do cash upon delivery. So it can get people into trouble considering it's a unlimited amount. But the 3% charges that come with it, I mean, if you APR that out over the course of the year, it could be substantially higher than any other line of credit or services that we essentially offer.
Yeah. I also think that, a line of credit it can be super powerful, but on average with the construction industry, because it's all asset backed, like your line of credit is based on your receivables, right? So a lot of times I have literally never seen anybody get a line of credit over 10% of their revenue. And it's oftentimes just not enough. It's not enough to float the cost of the job for 60 to 90 days. So you really need to utilize a few of these financing options to grow the business. One of which I think is super powerful is utilizing your supplier terms. So with your suppliers, ideally you have like a few suppliers that are your go-to, right? You have a relationship with them. When you're just starting out the relationship, more often than not, you are COD, right? You have to pay immediately. Or if you're lucky, you get net 30. That's pretty standard. But the bigger the relationship that you have with those suppliers, the longer the term length, right? So we really want to bridge the gap between when you need to pay for the materials and when you get paid on the job. So some of my customers who have had relationships with suppliers, they actually have pay when paid terms with suppliers. But what I'll say to that is that your terms cost something. It's not going to be a line item, but if you have pay when paid terms, and that's great, but those terms cost money in the sense that, okay, well, what if I actually became COD? And by utilizing an early pay program, essentially. So I had a couple customers that were pay when paid, and they ended up becoming cash customers. What percent does that earn them, right? It's somewhere between 6 to 8%, believe it or not. So it covers the cost of using an EPP program, and even sometimes they make a couple points on their materials. So I definitely think utilizing supplier terms is overlooked. A lot of contractors just kind of take it at face value, like, oh, I get net 30, it is what it is. You absolutely can negotiate your supplier terms, 100%. And really, the other one that I would like to touch on, obviously, is the early pay program. Um, Derek, I don't know if you maybe want to elaborate a bit more on that too.
Yeah, so it's essentially, and I'll touch on, I believe it was Mr. Austin Stephen that was asking essentially the difference between our approach and factoring invoices. So factoring can be a gambit of different products. Like Courtney was saying, it could be MCAs, which are essentially a factoring style product. The difference between our approach, it is a factoring style product, but it's not as aggressive. What we do is we use any of your accounts receivable and we will purchase that, but it's for a 60-day period and it's 4% or less. So if you only want to do it for 30 days, it would be 2% of a receivable. Now, going into the early pay program, it can be extremely beneficial for, as I was saying, the opportunity cost. If you're growing in size, if you're trying to take on larger jobs, just because the financial burden of growing, even when you bid a couple jobs that you didn't expect to win, and now you have to perform, can come into play when you're in a pinch. Now,
Yeah.
what Courtney was saying is with the 57-day average of when GCs actually pay you back, I mean, if you have 4 jobs that are starting up at a time and you have to pay the mobilization and carry those costs for 2 months, I mean, it can be detrimental to your business and the growth of it.
Yeah, I think like a big component in that too is just planning. I mean, it goes into every asset of the business, right? But there's only so much that you can plan for. So I think it's super important to have a solid understanding of your financial strengths and even more importantly, the weaknesses, so that you can pinpoint which financing option makes the most sense for your business. And what I'll go back to the factoring versus EPP. So with factoring, it's very similar. It's very similar in the sense that they buy your receivable, right? But the factoring companies, and the reason why factoring got such a bad rep when it first came out is because they insert themselves in the repayment process. So you sell your receivable to a factoring company, they're then knocking down the doors of your general contractors, like demanding payment. And there is nothing more important in this industry than your client, which is your general contractor. You cannot have anybody infiltrating that partnership that you have, because it is truly so important. So with an EPP program, the communication is key, I'll say that, but no EPP program is going to be knocking down the door of your GC. I think that's probably the biggest differentiator. Also, the financing costs associated is pretty drastic, but the biggest thing from my experience is the factoring companies, they want their money and they want it now. And it can really damage the relationship that you have with your general contractor. But these financing options, I mean, there's not like besides like what I'll say is the MCA, there's really not like, oh, you should not use this, because there is a situation in which every single one of these makes sense. But it's important for you to get a true understanding of your financials. There's a lot of time, like Derek and I, we have a lot of financial reviews with subcontractors. And I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of people that they're so busy working on the business that they don't get a chance to work like in the business, right? And like understanding where their margins are at, which GCs pay the best. Okay, so if you have a good GC and they give you good jobs, good work, like start building up that relationship and don't just bid to bid. So there's a lot of avenues here. But I wouldn't say that anything on this screen is necessarily bad, right? There's a place for every single one of these.